If you collected hockey cards in the early 1990s, chances are that some of these sets were the first cards that you ever bought. 1990 was really the year the hockey card collecting finally caught up with the rest of the sports card collecting world. While the old suspects like Topps and OPC were still around, there was an influx of new sets to make things a lot more interesting. This was also the first year we saw cards from companies like Pro Sets. That was a company that was originally founded exclusively to make American football cards. The industry exploded with more cards and more selection than ever before. And this was great for collectors, even if there were a couple of hiccups along the way. In fact, if you trace through the entire history of hockey cards, 1990 was really the watershed year. We finally went from having just a couple of companies in the industry to having full-on competition. Imagine that. And the improvements in card quality were obvious from the start. As you probably already know, hockey cards started off in cigarette packs in the early 1910s. It's similar to how baseball cards started. Some of the cards from that era are absolutely famous, and of course there weren't a ton of cards from these early sets printed. The early days of hockey card collecting were notorious for all sorts of shady practices by the manufacturers of the cards. In particular, companies were more than happy to artificially short print certain cards to make collecting an entire set difficult, and that was especially important if they offered to give you a free set of ice skates if you gave them the whole set, which did happen in the 20s, I think. And there are enough interesting examples of that to make its own video, so look for that coming up in the future. But it's not really until the 1930s, when the cards were packaged with gum, that the industry really started to take off. The first OPC set was sold in 1933, and honestly, these cards didn't look like much. Then again, most of OPC's competitors looked similar, such as this card from that year's Canadian gum set. Back in those days, a penny would get you a card and a stick of bubble gum, something that should sound familiar to anybody who has studied the history of baseball cards from this era. With the coming of the Second World War, OPC stopped producing hockey cards, and there was a bit of a lull in the industry. In fact, Parkhurst was the company that made major hockey sets in the 1950s, starting with this 1951 set, and notice that the design looked a lot like those 1930 sets. The price was the same too, 5 cards for 5 cents, sticking with that penny per card tradition. The quality of those Parkhurst cards improved as the decade went on. And interestingly enough, the Topps company of Brooklyn, New York decided to get into the act, producing a small set in 1954 to compete with Parkhurst. So it's kind of odd that Topps decided to go after the hockey market. Now remember, Topps was in the middle of a major war over baseball cards with Bowman. Topps started off with a few college football sets in the early 1950s, but the company abandoned those really quickly, and those cards are not really good. And instead of making basketball cards, which is a sport for which there were literally no cards at all, Topps decided to duke it out directly with Parkhurst in the hockey industry. That's an interesting strategy. It's also a strategy that really didn't work. As nice as those Topps cards look, the company bowed out of the hockey business for a few years. It wasn't until 1957 that Topps gave hockey cards another try, and by this time Topps had bought out its old competitor Bowman. The Topps cards were a lot more attractive than these Parkhurst cards, but Topps still had problems with distribution. So the history here is a little bit murky, and as usual, the newspapers of the times didn't really print many articles about, the card industry because this was stuff for kids or whatever. But it seems that Topps and OPC entered into some sort of agreement starting in 1958. I'm kind of speculating here, but I think that Topps did this to take advantage of OPC's distribution network throughout Canada. OPC, meanwhile, took advantage of the superior Topps printing technology, and that's how the companies got together. I'm not sure whether this 1958 set should be called Topps or OPC. The backs indicate that it was printed by Topps Chewing Gum, TCG, and that it was printed in the United States. But the packaging clearly indicates that the cards were distributed by OPC, and any mention of Topps is minimized. At any rate, the OPC set looks a lot better than that year's Parkhurst set, which was sloppy at best. By 1961, Topps had acquired OPC, but the printing facilities to create the cards were moved up to OPC's headquarters in London, Ontario. And so the backs of those cards indicate that they were created in Canada, or lithographed as it says here. While most in the hobby call these Topps cards, I really think that these should be considered OPC cards. But it's not like that really matters anyway. I mean, the market for these cards was always going to be chiefly in Canada and the northeastern United States, especially during the original 6 era. And in the end, the old Topps strategy proved to be very successful. The final Parkhurst set in 1963 had a certain nationalist flair to it. But of course, the Montreal players didn't have a flag behind them. These cards are anything but attractive, and it makes it pretty obvious why Parkhurst didn't last. The OPC design, meanwhile, was attractive and innovative, and as usual, a glance at the backs will tell you about the company's attention to quality. And that's really where the monopoly was born. It honestly wasn't until 1990 that the stranglehold that Topps, or OPC, however you want to look at it, had on the market was finally broken. Starting in 1968, Topps and OPC printed separate products, one for the United States and one for Canada. The Topps cards came first and were printed in a single series in late 1968. Meanwhile, OPC wound up going through 2 series and the cards came out a little bit later. While both sets look similar, the OPC has over 200 cards, while the Topps set only has 132. And that's pretty much what the pattern was for years. The OPC sets tended to be larger, but it also seems that the OPC sets overall had smaller print runs than the Topps sets. So the OPC cards also happen to be harder to find in top condition, which helps explain why the OPC versions tend to be a lot more expensive. I mean, a Wayne Gretzky rookie is going to be worth a lot no matter what set it is, but all collectors know that this OPC version is the true holy grail and that the price will likely never stop climbing. Now, in contrast to what Topps did with its baseball card monopoly, the company's hockey cards were generally good looking throughout the monopoly years. Then again, the backs were almost illegible, something that Topps was known for in those days. By the late 1980s, however, the designs on the front started to stagnate a little bit. These sets just feel dated today, and they're nothing like what was coming to the industry. Now, 1989 was the year that Upper Deck entered the world of baseball cards, and it really is the year that the hobby changed. So Upper Deck's focus was on giving collectors what they wanted instead of just slapping together a bunch of stuff every year and making like minor changes to the design, stuff like that. This also marked a major shift away from sticking gum in packs. There was instead a shift towards exciting designs and action shots. It's impossible to exaggerate just how important Upper Deck was to the hobby in 1989. The industry had never seen anything like these cards with their vibrant colors, and Upper Deck was looking to expand as quickly as it could. And so Upper Deck decided to expand its operations beyond just baseball cards. Now, to give you an idea of how important hockey cards have traditionally been in the sports card world, you need to realize that Upper Deck went straight for the hockey market. Upper Deck's hockey cards came out before the company touched the NFL or even the NBA, and this is back when there were not a lot of companies making NBA cards. Now, while I'm sure the NHL was easier to work with than those other leagues, I'm also convinced that Upper Deck went to hockey because there was just a more established and longer tradition of collecting hockey cards. It's not like basketball where Topps literally stopped making sets for a whole decade. The 1990 Upper Deck hockey set is one of the most iconic sets of this era. Both the fronts and backs were gorgeous and vibrant. The photography in the set is brilliant and the cards have a real personal feel to them. And it was far and away better than anything that OPC had come out with for decades. And with 550 cards divided into 2 series, it was a monstrously big set, even bigger than OPC's huge 1990 set. Well, of course, it wasn't all smiles and rainbows. Now, 1990 Upper Deck really is an absolutely fantastic set, but the cards were also very heavily printed. This is back when there was an absolute frenzy for trading cards, and the companies were more than happy to print tons and tons of cards to sell into all the hype. And so it's really not hard to find a complete 1990 Upper Deck hockey set for like $30 or less. Since the YouTubers apparently have forgotten about this set, you can still find unopened sealed boxes at reasonable prices. And even the high series boxes are not as expensive as you might think they would be. And all of this is making me wonder if I shouldn't go buy a box or 2 of these and open them on camera for this channel. So let me know in the comments what you think. Anyway, there's an even darker side to the Upper Deck experience than all of this. And this is the story that's kind of hush-hush. Not a lot of people in the hobby like to tell this one. In fact, I'm guessing that most of you probably aren't aware of this. Upper Deck decided to come out with a French-only set in 1990, something that was kind of an unusual decision. For years, OPC cards had featured text on the back in both English and in French. In fact, that's one of the easiest ways to tell if any given card is OPC or Topps. The United States cards will not have French on the back. While you did occasionally see French-only sets, they were usually small team sets, not the big sets. For example, this small 1986 Yum Yum Quebec Nordique set was in French only, but then again it was only available in Quebec. And that set the stage for the 1990 Upper Deck French high number scandal. Here we go. This is one of the craziest things that happened in the modern years of the hobby, and like I said, most people don't know about it. So this is the story as I understand it. Just so you know, this story comes mostly from Card Sharks, which is this 1995 book by Pete Williams all about Upper Deck, and I don't know if all of Pete's sources are actually correct. The story is that the first printing of Upper Deck French hockey didn't sell all that well, that most French Canadians simply were not interested in the product. Now, rumor had it that this was because of the animosity many of the Quebecois had for anything connected with Anglophone Canada. Anyway, when it came time to print the high-numbered cards, there was apparently an agreement that Upper Deck would only ship 600 cases of the high-numbered product. And Upper Deck being Upper Deck, the news leaked out as soon as that decision was made. Of course, given how the industry was at that time, any news or even rumor of scarcity was bound to cause investors or collectors to go totally nuts. And that's exactly what happened in this case. In theory, there should have only been 14,400 of these boxes printed. That's 600 cases with 24 boxes per case. That would have meant just a little over 2 million cards total. Now that's a number that might seem high for an unpopular set, but it's also a number that was a lot lower than every other set printed in the industry in 1990. Now the low number series of Upper Deck French started off selling for more than the English version, largely because it was theoretically only available in Canada. When the high number set dropped, everybody was talking about its limited print run, and this got to the point where stores were reluctant to name prices at first for their product. The mania was crazy. As late as June 1991, a single box of the high series was going for over $700 in British Columbia. The prices of a single box alone were all over the place, including the $600 listing at Sluggers near Toys R Us in Thornhill, Ontario. And a box in Calgary in December 1991 would have cost you over $625. Now, all of this was happening because of the rumor of a small printing. There was no proof of this, of course, it was only a rumor. But that rumor spread extremely quickly, and the way that Upper Deck released the high number series caused a lot of people to believe that the rumor was true. See, back in 1990, there was this BBS called Sportsnet that tried to serve as a type of clearinghouse for dealers and big-time collectors. When cases hit on Sportsnet for Upper Deck French high print 1990 hockey, the price went from about $2,000 a case, already pretty high, all the way up to about $14,000 a case. And the thing is that serious dealers then had to go to places like Sportsnet to buy these on the secondary market, since the distributors had basically no product. Now the mania was very real and the prices rose. So for example, the French version of the Sergei Fedorov rookie card was selling for almost $200 at one point. And that's allegedly when Upper Deck decided to secretly increase the print run of the Upper Deck French high series cards. While we might not know all of the details for sure, it's clear that some funny business was going on. Back in those days, employees of Upper Deck were given cases of product as bonuses and were also allowed to buy extra cases at a discount as a kind of investment. Now this was basically like an unofficial stock option to employees, and word has it that the allegedly short-printed Upper Deck French hockey high number cases were very popular. There's also a rumor that Upper Deck tried to sell these boxes and cases directly to the secondary market in hopes of capturing extra revenue. Now, whatever the reason, the truth is that there's a ton of this product out there, and the mania around the high number series died off. In fact, I actually own a complete set of 1990 Upper Deck French hockey, including the high numbers, and I got it for a pretty reasonable price on eBay not that long ago. Now, I wouldn't be able to afford that if the cards were truly short printed to the extent that they're talking about. Now, the rumor is that you can tell the first printing of the high numbered packs apart from the later printings. So the first printing should have 8 low number cards and 4 high numbered cards in each pack. The second printing is supposed to have 6 low numbered cards and 6 high numbered cards. Now the only way you can figure out which is to start cracking open packs. So like I said before, I don't know, do you guys want to see something like that on this channel? Like, let me know what you think, and if there's enough support, I'll see if I can get 1 or 2 of those sealed boxes and we can have some fun. Anyway, despite all the controversy, 1990 Upper Deck really is a fantastic set. This set was like a breath of fresh air to the hockey card industry, and it's one of the most significant sets in the history of the hobby, even when you take all the controversy into consideration. And Upper Deck was not the only company pushing out a high-quality hockey product in 1990. There was also this company called Pro Set out of Texas, of all places. It's a company that got its start with American football the year before, and these cards were simply awesome looking. Like Upper Deck, Pro Set's focus was on making attractive cards that were appealing to collectors. While the backs were not quite as nice looking as what Upper Deck offered, it was still a step up from the OPC Monopoly years. And the thing about Pro Set is that the company wasn't afraid to print a ton of cards. Pro Set's initial hockey offering featured 705 cards divided into 2 series. That's more than even the 1990 Upper Deck set. Well, Pro Set was not really a premium product, though it was kind of close. The company was really more focused on making an attractive card that would get people interested in collecting in general. The theory here was that it would work if they printed a massive set with tons and tons of cards, and if there was a card for literally everything possible. That's even more obvious when you look at Pro Set's football sets in the United States. These cards actually look a little better than the company's first hockey set, but you can still see the similarity. The 1990 football set looked a little closer to the company's 1990 hockey set. And as you probably know, these cards were printed like there was no tomorrow. Sets, boxes, and even cases of this product are still really easy to get, even though it's been 35 years. And I really mean it when I say that cases like this are plentiful and easy to get hold of. Now, that's not a good thing if you're looking to make like a long-term investment, but if you just want to like crack some packs, look at some cool cards, and remember the good times, 1990 Pro Set is a fine set to go for. It might not look as nice as Upper Deck, but it's still not a bad set. And then there was Score. Unlike the traditional card companies, Score was founded specifically to sell trading cards and not as a bubblegum company. While its 1988 baseball set was overprinted and is mostly worthless, Score made a name for itself by using a ton of action photos. And the backs of Score's cards were full color, which is something that we hadn't seen in the baseball card industry since the 1950s. Score's 1989 football set is one of the most iconic football sets of all time and is still a favorite to this day. And those cards had a low print run, which is why they tend to command a lot of money in the secondary market. Score went from baseball to football and then directly to hockey. Boom, boom, boom. Like I said, this is a pretty good piece of evidence of how well established the world of hockey card collecting really was. Score came out with 2 sets in 1990, one Canadian and one United States. Both sets had 440 total cards. The backs looked nice, though they weren't quite as revolutionary as what Upper Deck printed. And of course, the way to differentiate them is by reading the backs, since the United States versions don't have the French language. And then there's this nice image of the 2 flags together, something that I really wish we could see again in our current age of political tension. Of course, the problem with Score is the same as the problem with all the other sets. There was a whole ton of this product made, and you can still get it for really, really cheap if you want. A lot of kids bought these cards back in the early 1990s thinking that they would be worth something one day. Well, if you were looking for a payday, I've got some bad news. Of course, part of the problem is that this was back when companies started selling complete factory sets. It kind of takes the fun out of collecting cards in packs when you can just buy the set in one whole go. Overall, Score's packaging was excellent and the cards weren't bad. I seriously think that Score's card packs look better than any other 1990 brand. It still is an attractive set, even if it was horribly overproduced. And speaking of high production rates, we still need to look at OPC and Topps. We should probably start with OPC Premier, which is the most scarce of the 1990 sets. Topps was hoping to come up with something to compete with Upper Deck, and this was the company's first attempt. It's honestly not a horrible set by traditional hockey card standards, but it's also kind of boring in comparison with the other 1990 offerings. Now, there's not a whole ton of 1990 OPC Premier out there, which is the reason I wanted to bring this set up first. If you're looking at this only as a long-term financial investment, this is probably the one set from 1990 that you would actually consider. These boxes are not easy to find, and there aren't a whole ton of them out there. I mean, for this price, you could probably buy over 20 full Score sets. And collectors legitimately will pay a few $100s for these wax boxes. And apparently at least one of these boxes went for over $1,100. Now that's ridiculous, by the way. I know that this was marketed as a premier product, but the truth is that Upper Deck, Pro Set, and even Score actually look better. The only bad part about this OPC Premier set is that you have to have the cards. Of course, Premier did look better than the base OPC and Topps sets, which were really boring. I really feel like the card backs had declined significantly over time, however. I suppose the cards aren't ugly, they're certainly better than, some of those old Parkhurst sets, but there's just no imagination to either of these products. Even the boxes didn't really look all that attractive. Now in hindsight, it's almost like Topps was conceding the market to the other companies. But there were a few special things about these traditional OPC and Topps sets that I should mention. So first of all, OPC had sets commemorating the Red Army team. This is back when the NHL would have a Super Series against the visiting Soviet teams every year. This is a tradition most people have forgotten about. These cards are really cool, even if they might not be worth a whole ton. The second thing to mention is Topps Tiffany, or the Collector's Edition set. This was the first year that Topps made a Tiffany version of its hockey set. These were glossy cards printed on high-quality white cardstock. They're also limited to only 3,000 full sets, which really does mean something. And unlike Upper Deck, Topps actually kept its word and didn't do any of that secret reprinting stuff. But again, the problem with Topps Tiffany is that they are Topps cards. These cards might have the quality and the gloss that Upper Deck had, but the designs were still really lame and the backs were nothing short of awful. Now what I've never understood about the Topps Tiffany idea is why the company didn't, just make the base product better and charge a little bit more money per pack. And of course, that's what Topps eventually started to do. Anyway, we've got one more set to go over. After an experiment with baseball the year before, Topps decided to release another hockey set under the Bowman name in 1990. Like the early baseball Bowman sets, the backs were almost entirely illegible. The fronts had stationary poses. In fact, every single one of these cards looks utterly boring. And there's basically an infinite number of these sets out there. I'm pretty sure that these were only sold in the United States, though you guys are going to have to help me out with those details in the comments. And then you've got the insert set, the hat trick set. These were the early years of insert sets, and so you had this pretty pointless looking Bowman insert. So now you know that Mario Lemieux had 4 hat tricks in the 1989-90 season. Now Bowman also has a Tiffany set, just in case you couldn't have enough of these cards. The backs of these babies are actually legible for a change. And there were also Tiffany versions of the hat trick cards, because why not? I'm guessing that somebody out there is interested in these, but that somebody isn't me. These boxes are fairly rare, and a sealed set is worth a few $100s. The only problem, of course, is that you're buying 1990 Bowman cards. So anyway, there you have it. There are the 1990 hockey card sets, at least the major ones, and I'll tell you which ones are my favorites. If it's not obvious yet, I'll make it obvious. I really like the 1990 Upper Deck set. These cards look fantastic, and the set is better than that year's Upper Deck baseball set, in my opinion. And yes, the French cards are my favorite variation. Even with all the shenanigans, this was a really good idea, and these cards are just fun to have. So if you can only get one 1990 hockey set, you need to go for Upper Deck. The cards are really a lot of fun to look at, even though they're not really worth much money. It's kind of close, but I've got to stick Pro Set in second place. This really isn't a premium set, but it's a quality set and it's a lot of fun to look at. I've got to put Score just a little bit behind Pro Set, but I could see it going either way with these two. Score cards are underrated in general. This is a company that needs more love. I seriously think that too many collectors focus only on the secondary market prices and not on how the cards actually look. Now both Pro Set and Score hockey cards from 1990 look absolutely fantastic. We especially need more love for Score in general in the hobby, at least in my opinion. And then you've got the OPC and Topps combination. These sets are boring and uninspired. Even the special box bottom panel cards put me to sleep. Seriously, this was the best they could do? And finally, you've got 1990 Bowman, which is overall a really bad set. If you like these cards, more power to you, but I don't. So anyway, there you have it. Frankly, I really wish that we had more competition in the hobby these days. The competition among these companies became really fierce and card quality increased as time went on. This really was the golden age of hockey cards, even if a lot of them aren't really worth that much money today. And after all, the low prices you see these days just means that the cards are on sale.